Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 17 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Hunting of the White Stag. We made it, Phil. We're here at the end of this season.
This is it.
Yeah, we are really excited, and I promised this last time, listeners, we have another special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
This is Brian Carnell from NarniaWeb.com, also the producer and co-host of Talking Beasts, the Narnia podcast.
Woohoo!
Yes, we have the man, the myth, the legend here himself. Brian, we are so excited to have you. We were just talking right before we were recording, and you actually appeared in our very first episode as a note in the description. Phil and I linked to one of your YouTube videos about the Narnia orders. And it's funny, I was actually thinking about this just the other day as we were kind of putting our schedule together for this season and kind of thinking about where we want to go in the future. There were two people, you and David Bates, who was on last episode, who I remember mentioned to Phil, like, there's these two guys that are really interested in Narnia and C.S. Lewis. It'd be so cool if we could get them on in, a couple of years after we've, gotten a little bit of a following and stuff. And this is insane to me that here we are at the end of just the first season, and we've gotten both of you guys on here, and I couldn't be more excited.
Well, I'm just excited that there's so much. I mean, there's so much to unpack, obviously, in these books, and it just seemed perfect for a podcast to me. These books that are relatively short, but so much there to unpack. It just seems ideal for a podcast, and I was really excited when I saw that someone else was crazy enough to try it. So that was my reaction when I heard about the Lamppost Listener.
It's awesome.
And you were also nice enough, I think we mentioned this after we'd kind of released a couple of episodes, that you reached out to us like just a couple of days after the show first premiered. And we're like, this is great. Like, I also kind of have a Narnia podcast, and we were really overjoyed that someone else was not viewing this as, oh my goodness, there's competition, but this is great. We can expand the community even more and more. So we were really thankful for that.
Oh, heck no. Narnia doesn't get nearly enough attention. It doesn't get nearly the recognition it deserves. It's viewed as, it's Lord of the Rings, the G-rated Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's so much more than that. And so the more attention we can shine on Narnia, the better.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, listeners, we have the final chapter of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe today. We left our characters at the end of chapter 16. Aslan, Lucy, and Susan had arrived at the giant battle here, the climactic battle at the end of the book. And we're going to pick up pretty much right where that last scene left off. And it is an odd chapter, which means I have the final chapter summary. Are y'all ready?
Ready.
Let's do it.
The witch's army is quickly defeated after Aslan's arrival. Once the battle is over, Lucy revives an injured Edmund with her cordial, but Aslan has to remind her not to neglect the rest of the Narnians. The next day, the four Pevensies are crowned in Cair Paravel as the kings and queens over Narnia. During the celebration, Aslan quietly slips away. Years after the witch's defeat, Narnia enters a golden age, and King Peter the Magnificent, Queen Susan the Gentle, King Edmund the Just, and Queen Lucy the Valiant reign prosperously. When rumors of a white stag in the western woods reach them, the four monarchs embark on a hunting party. Here in the woods, they come across the lamppost near the wardrobe entrance. They don't recognize it. As they continue to search, the Pevensies unknowingly stumble back through the wardrobe into England and return to their childhood selves.
Well done.
And I hit exactly 150 words, I think for the third time this season, which I'm really, really proud of.
Nice round number.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great. So before we jump into the actual text itself, are there any things that we want to talk about, just overarching things about this chapter that stick out to y'all?
I think for the last chapter, what I was kind of reflecting on as I was rereading it recently was just I really appreciate the amount of time Lewis spends on. We kind of talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but the amount of time he spends on joy and the aftermath. The story's over. Narnia's won. Aslan's won. But, the Pevensies takes time to describe them visiting, like getting their feet in the water at the beach and, the cry of the seagulls, do you remember, and those details, and just the party, and then how they grew up and became, great kings and queens, and they reigned well, and he takes the time to really revel in the joy. And I think a lot of, I'm actually more of a movie guy than a book guy, but so I can just say at least a lot of movies today, I think are afraid to go there too much because it assumes a level of emotional investment on the part of the viewer that they're afraid to assume. To just say that we don't need conflict, we don't need explosions, we don't need battles, we don't need suspense. To have scenes just dedicated to seeing, okay, our main characters have won, and now we can just revel in that for a bit. That assumes that you're only going to care about that if you really, really care. And it takes a lot of confidence as a storyteller to say that, yes, the viewer, or in this case, the reader, is going to care enough to want to revel in that. So I really appreciate I think the confidence that Lewis shows here in writing this final chapter. It's our confidence in the level of emotional investment his reader's going to have in the story. And I had it. I could see where if you're just kind of liking the story, you're not really into it, it might seem like after the battle is like, okay, do I even really need to read the final chapter? But I'm just so invested in the characters in the story. I want all I can get.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think to add on to that, just I noticed myself that I was really invested in it because I was enjoying it so much as I was reading this last chapter. But it's so different than other stories where the battle is kind of the main thing. In this book, we talked about it, the last 2 episodes, but the battle is over so quickly. It's not quite like other things. It doesn't have that 20-minute fight scene. Like the battle is pretty much won by the time Aslan gets there, because he's like so efficient at it. And even when the children are coming back to the real world, back to the frame story that surrounds all the stuff going on in Narnia, I kind of felt sad as we were getting pulled back into it. I was like, oh, and like you're slowly remembering all the details. You're like, oh, he's talking about the lamppost. And then as soon as you realize that, you're back in the real world.
Right.
Yeah, those are really good points. So let's start looking a little bit more closely at the text.
Yeah, so one thing that I really enjoyed was the cross attitude that Lucy has when she is concerned about her brother Edmund. And I'm going to read that portion for us. And then, almost for the first time, Lucy remembered the precious cordial that had been given to her for a Christmas present. Her hands trembled so much that she could hardly undo the stopper, but she managed it in the end and poured a few drops into her brother's mouth. There are other people wounded, said Aslan, while she was still looking eagerly into Edmund's pale face and wondering if the cordial would have any result. Yes, I know, said Lucy crossly. Wait a minute. Daughter of Eve, said Aslan in a graver voice. Others also are at the point of death. Must more people die for Edmund? I'm sorry, Aslan, said Lucy, getting up and going with him. And for the next half hour they were busy, she attending to the wounded, while he restored those who had been turned into stone.
What an interesting exchange, right?
Yeah, I think it's a very unexpected and human moment. Lucy and the Narnians are on this high, and they come charging into battle, and they win very quickly. The battle is over just a few minutes after their arrival, and it's been so joyful and so exciting. And it's moments like this that give Narnia such a feeling of reality, despite the fact that it doesn't have the elaborate mythology that Lord of the Rings does, and it's obviously not as detailed in its history, but it gets the human moments right. And right here, I think another author might have Lucy immediately just ran off and started healing everyone else and continue that feeling of joy and excitement and that momentum. And the fact that in this fairy tale story, Lucy says, no, I'd kind of rather just be with my brother, which is not the heroic thing to do, but I think most people, that's absolutely what they would do in that moment. It's just be concerned about their brother and maybe just forget for a moment that, wait, I have to be responsible for other people too. So even though Lewis uses very few strokes to paint his picture, the picture he does paint feels so real and credible because there's these human moments that almost feel too real to be fictional.
Right. And even Aslan's response to that, where he says basically the same thing, but in a firmer tone. And it just...
A graver voice, yeah.
Yeah, a graver voice. And he kind of he states a fact. Others are also at the point of death. And just kind of gets her to snap out of that human moment.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess we're not really talking about the movies now, but the movies pretty much... Disney movie pretty much does just Lucy... She's Aslan is like, all right, Edmund's all right. I'm going to go heal people. Which, interestingly enough, feels fun. When I watched the movie, I guess we're not really talking about the movie. But when
you can talk about it.
But when I watched the movie, I do understand why they changed it, and I can never quite been able to explain it. But in the context of the movie, I think, yeah, if they'd have had the scene here where Aslan kind of tells Lucy off, it would feel wrong in this context. I've never quite been able to put my finger on it, but emotionally, in the context of that point in the movie, at least, all the storytelling decisions they made up to that point, it does seem like it wouldn't fit. Whereas here, it makes complete sense to me. Might just be something about the difference between just something that's inherent to the difference between books and films. So I've never quite been able to put my finger on why it feels so right here, but I'm not sure it would feel right in the movie.
I can totally see what you're saying. I haven't seen the movies in a while, but I can picture it, and I can see how it might not fit in a movie, especially if you think about like the music that would be playing in the background and stuff. It would seem like as an emotional disruption.
Yeah, it might just be the tone that Andrew Adamson had set for the movie would compare to the tone that Lewis has set in the book. It might have something to do with that. I don't think it's that this inherently can't work in film, but for whatever reason, the tone that Adamson had set up to this point, this wouldn't quite make sense. But I've never quite been able to put my finger on it completely.
Well, and it is a weird exchange. I mean, think about it. Lucy and Aslan are probably the two most important characters to the plot, right? Throughout the book, like maybe Edmund would be the other person you throw in there, but those three have, and this scene involves all three of them, have really moved the plot along more than any other characters. And yet, here at the end of the book, two of those characters have a conflict. Like, this was supposed to be
Yeah.
after everything's happened, and yet Lewis sets us up with this, not a big conflict, but this kind of just short exchange where Lucy is being kind of short with Aslan. And I don't necessarily know why that works. Like, almost to me, not only should it not work in a film, it really shouldn't work here, but Lewis is a genius, and so therefore it does,
Mhm.
and it feels real.
Yeah.
So moving on, Lucy is able to, Edmund gets better. She's able to heal him, and she goes on. There's that quote that C.S. Lewis makes about, this is the best she's been since he went to that horrid school where everything had gone wrong, which I just love those kind of asides to us as audience members. And then there's a really interesting exchange where Lucy asks Susan, does he know what Aslan did for him? And Susan says, no, he shouldn't know, and think about how you'd feel. And I want to ask y'all, do we agree that Edmund shouldn't know what happened for him? Because Aslan makes it clear that there were consequences. He says, must more people die for Edmund? That
That's a good point.
Not only was Aslan killed, but all those Narnians, a lot of this was kind of spurred on. Edmund was the catalyst for what happened here. And so Edmund does bear some responsibility. And yet we hear the sister saying, oh, no, Susan specifically, we shouldn't let Edmund know what Aslan did for him. Like, what do y'all make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. I think that we're getting the two perspectives there, and the scene ends on a bit of a ... and maybe someone does end up telling Edmund ultimately, and maybe he does ultimately find out. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if we ever get an indication later in the series that he does find out. Yeah, I think it leaves it on kind of a question mark. Is it important that he knows? Certainly, Edmund seems completely to have repented. So I don't think that's going to be a factor, whether he knows what Aslan did or not. But yeah, I think the movie kind of leaves it. I'm sorry, the book kind of leaves it up in the air a little bit.
Yeah.
I was waiting for them to address that again later on in the chapter, and then I read through the chapter again, and I still don't. I still don't see it. And I think that's very interesting to never come back and address that. It kind of leaves it open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you talk about real moments, like how often do you have conversations that don't actually have conclusions? I mean, that is real, know.
It's very real.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So after that, we have a passage of the book that I wanted to read here, right directly after this conversation. That night, they slept where they were. How Aslan provided food for them all, I don't know. But somehow or other, they found themselves all sitting down on the grass to a fine high tea at about 8 o'clock. Next day, they began marching eastward down the side of the great river. And the next day after that, at about tea time, they actually reached the mouth. The castle of Cair Paravel on its little hill towered up above them. Before them were the sands with rocks and little pools of salt water and seaweed, and the smell of the sea and long miles of bluish-green waves breaking forever and ever on the beach. And oh, the cry of the seagulls! Have you heard it? Can you remember? And I love that we get to end with at least a at least one passage reading of C.S. Lewis's description of Narnia, because this is a great place to end here with the waves crashing along the shore next to Cair Paravel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful that Lewis felt the need to take the time. I mean, you could easily cut that paragraph out and you wouldn't notice. In fact, it's probably, well, shouldn't we just get on to the coronation? But the fact that he takes the time to revel in the fact that, they got to get their feet in the water and the sound of the seagulls. And it sounds like, in the way Lewis writes, and oh, the cry of the seagulls, have you heard it? Can you remember? Which is something that I guess most people haven't necessarily got to hear very often. Now, I grew up really close to the beach, so I heard it quite a bit. But most people, that's not something they necessarily heard a lot. And so it seems like for Lewis, that would have been something that he had a sense of nostalgia about it. I don't think a lot of people would too. I think it evokes. I don't know if you guys have talked about Sehnsucht on this podcast, but I
literally have it in my notes right here for this passage.
Okay,
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you guys talked about it before? I can't remember.
No, we haven't.
Okay, but so I'll let you talk about it. But it's
No. You're the guest. You go ahead.
Well, it's basically Lewis. It's a German word that Lewis used, and the closest English translation of it is nostalgia, though even that is probably not quite on the mark. But it's a desire for something where the desire itself is actually more desirable than any satisfaction. And Lewis talks about in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, and other places, this feeling he had that ultimately led him to believe that, he famously reasoned that if I find in myself a desire that nothing earthly can satisfy, the most logical explanation is that I was made for another world. And so there is this sense of slight anguish in the description there. And oh, the cry of the seagulls, have you heard it? Can you remember? In this sense of longing. And I think that, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the rest of the certainly these next few pages are just kind of about these children. It sounds cheesy to say, but fulfilled their destiny and went into another world and found out that they were made for something so much greater. And there was a prophecy about them, and they're kings and queens, and there's something higher than themselves, higher than just their own satisfaction that they're called to serve. I think Narnia, more than any other book I've ever read, these books really awaken in me that desire for another world and make me wonder, why does the concept of another world seem so exciting to me? And so I think that sense of the fact that Lewis takes the time to revel in that sense of nostalgia, that sense of longing, is really, really important, even though it's a small detail. It really helps set, he does that again and again throughout these books, and it really helps set the tone.
I'm so glad that you share that, because our notes were so similar, and that makes me so happy that you were able to come on and share those thoughts, because as I was doing studying for this episode and just doing a little bit of research, I actually was not very familiar with Sehnsucht. Am I saying that right? Sehnsucht?
I've always said Sehnsucht. I think that's correct.
Sehnsucht. I mean, I don't know. So, and I had, I'd seen a little bit of that in reading some of C.S. Lewis's works, but I'd never made any kind of connection to Narnia with it. And as I was reading through this, that really stuck out to me, and I think you gave a great explanation of that. I even had the Mere Christianity quote here in my notes. But I wanted to go out on a limb just a little bit further and see what y'all think about this, because I think really C.S. Lewis, like you said, is appealing to this yearning, this longing, this nostalgia and desire for something. But there's also a small connection I made, as we know that our four main characters here are about to not remember any of their time in the previous world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any possibility that C.S. Lewis is actually asking his readers, maybe it's almost kind of puts the question to their head of maybe they've been to Narnia, because he's talking about seagulls, which we have here, obviously, in our world. But he's talking not just about them, but the castle of Cair Paravel, and you see all these waves, and he's got this imagery of Narnia, and he's like, have you heard it? Can you remember? And part of me also was just thinking, is he asking me if I've been here before? And I don't think that's the main point of it, but it's just something that really stuck out to me.
I think there is probably more of, again, for a lot of people, the chance to visit the sea and hear the seagulls is a rare opportunity, and there's something magical about it. And so he's probably trying to take something in his fantasy world and compare it to something that you have actually experienced and say it was kind of like that. in which it gives it a little more feeling of reality. My sense is that's what he's trying to do there.
Yeah. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, especially for me, I don't live at the beach, and I get to go to the beach like maybe once a year. So I have lots of happy memories at the beach, but I wasn't there for very long. So it's kind of like a faint, distant memory most of the time. And I think that's a really powerful device for the cry of the seagulls. Have you heard it? Can you remember?
Yeah, and by the way, like, so I grew up pretty close to the beach, but I only saw snow a couple times for most of my life. So when I first read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, honestly, that was half the reason it seems so magical to me was the snow.
That's cool.
Well, I
There's
had
snow
this
everywhere.
otherworldly feeling. And by the way, when we were on Narnia Web and we were doing the audio commentaries for the movies, when I was watching, like when there's the scene in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe movie where all the Peventies are playing in the snow, and I was going, "Oh, that'd be awesome! That'd be so much fun to play in the snow." And my two co-hosts who were from a colder climate were going, "Oh, I always watch that go. Oh gosh, they're going to be so cold, and it's going to melt to getting their pants." And we had totally different reactions. And then in the scene in Prince Caspian, when they're playing at the beach, when they're playing in the water, I was watching it going, "Oh, that would get all salty and that'd be miserable."
Yeah.
And my two co-hosts were like, "That'd be awesome. That's what I would do." So totally flipped around.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, then I will let my crackpot theory just quietly slip away the same way that Aslan is going to in a couple of paragraphs.
Nice
You guys can
transition.
kinda have- So yeah, let's talk about this coronation and Aslan slipping away. What do we think of this? I don't have a ton of notes here. I'd rather just kind of hear y'all's reactions to this ceremony. I know we've been talking a little bit about the film, and I actually really like the way that this all plays out in the movie, and I think it's also great here in the book.
Yeah, it's basically incredibly happy. We have all the characters from the entire book all gathered in one place, and again, just reveling in the joy, reveling in we won, and some characters who we thought were dead, like Mr. Tumnus, who we thought was effectively dead, is going to be okay. I really enjoy taking the time to just to revel in that.
There's a paragraph in the midst of this scene. I'm going to tread very lightly here because again, Phil has not gone past this chapter. But there is a scene here where we have this, Tumnus the fawn and the beavers and the giant Rumblebuff and all their friends. They're all at this big feast, and it does remind me of a scene in the last battle. I'll just in a garden. That I don't want to say much more than that, but I draw some parallels to a scene in the last battle near the end of the book, where we see lots of characters, and I love that these, and obviously that's the last book, and so these kind of bookend the first and the last book, and I think that's really beautiful. I won't say anything else though.
Yeah, I guess we should stop there. It is a
Yeah.
similar thing, and when Lewis wrote this book, he didn't think he was going to write any more. He thought this would be the only book. So for him, this is kind of his big. This is it. This is my big climax. He's not doing what so many stories have to do now, which is we got to set up for the sequels or set up,
Yeah.
got to establish the universe. He's just focusing on telling a good story right now.
Exactly.
I love all that. Sorry, I love all that. Looking at this now, I just love all the Aslan stuff of how he quietly slipped away, and Mr. Beaver saying he'll be coming and going. One day you'll see him, and another you won't. And Aslan's an incredibly mysterious character, and as we learn more about him throughout the series, he actually becomes, in a way, more mysterious, and there are more questions raised about Aslan's nature the further along we go in the series, and this is kind of the beginning of asking those questions, or realizing that there are certain things about Aslan we're just not going to be told.
I love the repetition of not a tame lion too. Just
Uh-huh.
kind of, it's a nice bookend to an earlier part of the book.
Why do we think that Aslan quietly slips away? Is that just part of his mystery, or do you think there's actually a lesson here or a reasoning behind this? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think he has other
I would
countries
just-
to attend to.
Yeah, there's other countries to attend to, and I like the idea that Aslan, he's got a lot going on. This is one, maybe even a relatively minor thing on Aslan's plate. He has all these
True.
other things going on, and maybe things like, for us, this is, oh my gosh, climactic battle, life and death, all this stuff happening, but for Aslan, it's just Tuesday. So I think that it sets this precedent for Aslan that we only know 0.1% of what Aslan is up to. And again, with the other books, we learn more about him, but the more we learn about him, the more we realize how little we actually know about him. And I find that really, really exciting, actually. I think any other author And with a similar kind of character, it might just feel like a cop out. But for some reason, with Aslan, it just feels really exciting and mysterious. And I kind of don't want to know more about him in a way. I do, but I also don't want to know because I enjoy the mystery of it.
Yeah. I've found with a lot of characters, especially in fiction, more in the comic book area, the more you find out about something, the more disappointed you are. Just because it
Mm-hmm.
never quite lives up to what you imagined. And I think Star Wars had the same problem with the Clone Wars. Like when it's referenced, you're like, oh, what was that? And then when you find out, and that's like a slightly different example because of how those movies were made. But when you actually like find out what happened, it's like, oh, that's not quite what I pictured.
Yeah, it's a fine line between just being a cop out and being a real tease.
Yeah.
Being like, is it a frustrating piece of missing information that I feel like I really need to know, or is it a really intriguing mystery? And I think Lewis totally nails it and makes it an intriguing mystery.
I agree.
I mean, I think it goes back to what we've mentioned with J.J. Abrams, his mystery box, and that I think it would lose some of its appeal if we knew exactly what Aslan was going off to do the very next day. It's kind
Yeah,
of
but
cool that we're not going to see him for a very long. Well, Phil doesn't know, but it's going to be a very long time.
yeah, if you explain every single detail, it can make the world feel finite. We really get the sense here that Narnia is this huge world with any of these characters, even that kangaroo in the previous chapter, probably has a story, but we're just getting one of them right here. And so you really get the sense that Narnia is just like the real world. You can read a history book, but that's not the entire thing, obviously. That's just what they could fit on the page. And you really get the sense, and even there was the bit you just read where he said, like, I don't know how Aslan fed everybody. It's just a detail that that whoever the narrator or author or whatever of this never quite learned. That's how the real world works. You can't fit everything on the page. And so Narnia doesn't feel like a world it feels like a real world, and Lewis squeezed as much as he could into a short space as possible.
And that's really interesting because obviously we hear all the comparisons all the time between Lewis and Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and Narnia, but they're so different in this regard. Like in Middle Earth, everything is explained, and we know all. We can go back to the Silmarillion. We can go to all these different, histories of the
Yeah.
mythology, and that's great. And I love that. I'm not talking poorly about that. I love Tolkien's
Mm-hmm.
work, but at the same time, here in Narnia, there's so little that we know. I mean, I have literally made the joke. Not joke. It's actually a real frustration that I don't know where things are in this world. I don't know why it took 2 days for them to leave the battle scene to get to Cair Paravel, because when I look at the maps, it looks like it's really close, but so does the beaver and the witch's cat. Like, I don't know how any of this works, and that's kind of fine. One, it's a magical land, and that's okay, and it also does allow me to put a lot of myself into the work, as far as I get to use a lot of my imagination, whereas when
Yeah.
I'm reading The Lord of the Rings, I'm not really using any of my imagination to fill in gaps. I'm imagining the story in my head as I read it, but I'm actually given 90% of the information, whereas here in Narnia, I feel like I'm not even given half.
Yeah, certainly not to the I mean, I think everybody kind of has, and this it's true to some extent with any book, of course, that all of us make our own private movie in our heads that's ours. But I think Narnia especially does this because Lewis is so incredibly effective at giving you just the tiniest hint, just to nudge your imagination in a certain direction. And that's why I think a lot of people have these vivid memories that they created, but in their minds, it's almost like Inception, like that they created these things kind of in their own minds. But doesn't the book say that somewhere? And you often no, that's not what it says. It's because Lewis is so good. I think very often Lewis doesn't tell you, for example, what something looked like. He tells you what it felt like to look at it. And you imagine in your head what that would have to look like to give you that feeling. And so the result is
Oh, that's
that
well said.
it feels so personal and it speaks to you so personally. Now that's very easy to say, and it might seem like, oh, Lewis didn't put in the same amount of work that Tolkien did or something, or his world's not as detailed. It might seem easy, but it's really hard to find those. There's that old saying, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. It's actually more difficult to find just those few words, just that right. That's what writing's all about. Just that right combination of words that will give that reader just enough to where it can get their imagination going, but not so much that it limits their imagination. And I have not yet found an example of something that does that more effectively than Narnia, and that's why it just feels so. It feels like it's mine when I read it.
And
That's really well said. I think that perfectly encapsulates why we love this book so much, right? Like
Mhm.
why we have such a connection to it, and especially why I think reading it as a child or when you're younger, it really sticks with you. Think about all the books you read as a kid. That I know I read a lot of books as a kid, but this one just sticks with me, and I remember it so vividly. Even though I probably only read this 2 times as a kid, I don't think I read it a lot, and then I didn't pick it up for almost 20 years. And so
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
it's wonderful. So let's move on to the rounding up of the witches' army. So there's a couple of remnants of it, and we hear that the newly crowned kings and queens of Narnia, they go ahead and they're rounding up and they're exploring and they're not conquering. That's not the right word, but they are. I don't know what are they doing here,
Exterminating
guys?
the
There you go. Wow,
the final remnants of the witches' army.
exactly. Which does make me wonder, Brian, are you interested after we've gotten the Netflix adaptations of the 7 books? Do you want to see the Witches' Remnants, a Narnia story? Is that something you'd want to see?
Not particularly, no.
Okay. Me
It's-
neither.
yeah, I think I wouldn't. Yeah, I'll just say no for now and hold back the emotion because that would derail this entire conversation.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I don't think I'd be super interested in seeing this. I'm afraid this is no. We're gonna get off topic. We'll let you guys over at Talking Beast talk about this.
let's talk about the words that are used, though. They're
Okay.
seeking them out. That's fine. And then they're destroying them, which sounds really serious. But
Well, they are
Mhm.
bad guys.
they're bad guys. There's a haunting here and a killing there, which is terrifying.
Right.
And then I really am curious what you guys think about the saved good trees from being unnecessarily cut down. Are those the ones that didn't tell the White Witch what was going on?
I don't know. I think the assumption is that no tree should be unnecessarily cut down, and so that trees are just. I'm not sure if I guess you could say that. Oh, that means that there were bad trees that should be cut down. I guess maybe I just took it to mean that they stopped the forest from being unnecessarily cut down, just as a general statement.
Yeah.
That's how I took it.
Would those trees also and you can correct us because again we are Narnia novices, although I think we're like intermediates now. That's kind of where we're at. The dryads are like those tree spirits connected to actual trees, right?
Right. Yeah.
So maybe some of these trees are also some of those dryad trees. Are there just regular trees without a dryad spirit or anything?
There does seem to be a distinction there. Yes, that there's just trees and then there's dryads, and I know that if you cut down. Like a dryad can exist separate from its tree.
Yeah.
And then if you cut down its tree, you'll see the spirit
Yeah, no,
die.
we can't talk anymore. We're getting.
So yeah, yeah.
There you go.
I already know that there's a garden and a beach in the next
Yeah.
books.
Darn it. No point in reading it now.
That's right.
Well, let's talk about the time jump that occurs after this big party.
Well, I'd like to talk about the way we jump up in time. Things really start speeding up. I mean, they're destroying the White Witch's army piece by piece. There's a haunting, a killing, and then it's like we just kind of kick it into overdrive, and 15 years fly by
Mm-hmm.
in one paragraph.
And how do you know it's 15 years, by the way? I mean, I know from Lewis's timeline. Did you just read the timeline, or is there's something in the book that told you that?
I think there's something in the book. Let me see if I can find that real quick.
I'm interested to know as well too, because have you been cheating, Phil?
Well, I did cheat, but that's beside the point.
So you did read the timeline.
No, I'm wondering. I read through the Wikipedia page for it to get some other notes as soon as I had finished the chapter.
Okay.
But now I'm wondering if I saw that on the Wikipedia page or if I saw that
Because
in
I'm
the book
I'm
itself.
pretty sure we only know that from Lewis's timeline that surfaced after his death.
Okay.
Maybe, Phil, C.S. Lewis wrote something that made you feel that it was 15 years. And that's kind of
Exactly.
where it's been like inceptioned into your brain. That's maybe what happened.
Wow.
That's right. And there is a
Book is
dream
awesome.
of a dream.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. The Dream of a Dream is coming up.
So we get King Peter the Magnificent, we get Queen Susan the Gentle, and Edmund the Just, and what's Lucy the Valiant, right?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden now, as they're going out, they also now speak in a very Shakespearean way. They have a very mature way of speaking now.
They're talking like Thor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, and that's where we get the part of one only remembers this as a dream or a dream of a dream. What do we make of the fact that they literally forget that they were kids from England?
Well, it's funny. I think there's among first time readers, I've heard two reactions to this that are completely opposite. One reaction is some people go, it was weird when I realized, oh wait, they're going to spend years in Narnia. What about their mom and dad back home? What about all their friends? They're just going to forget about that, and they're uncomfortable with that. Then one other reaction I see is the people that were disappointed they went back through the wardrobe at all. They wanted them to stay and be kings and queens
Mm.
forever for the rest of their lives. So totally different reactions. I can only say that I personally kind of buy into it. It was something I really didn't think about till someone brought it up later. But for me, it's yes, Narnia is awesome. Yes, they're discovering their destiny and all the things I talked about before. Of there's a prophecy about us, and there's something greater than our own satisfaction that we can be in service to. Um, and they just won a great battle. To me, I didn't even think about it when they were going on and becoming kings and queens. I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome. I didn't worry about life in their other world. It's just one of those fairy tale things that I didn't think about. So I can only speak to my own experience. And first time I read this, I was completely caught up in that, and I bought it. It didn't bother me. It wasn't until someone brought it up later that I even really gave it much thought.
What are your thoughts, Phil? Because you're rereading this just for the first time as an adult.
Yeah, so that's such a weird, weird thing to think about. And try to imagine right now. So you and I are both in our late 20s, and we're like, can you imagine going back to being like 8 or 9? Like, just how much stuff has happened,
Mm-hmm.
and like, and such a strange thing to think about. And like, then of course you would wonder, like, was it even real? Um, but you have to think like you would still have that kind of shared secret among each other,
Yeah, absolutely.
even though they tell the professor. So it's like you learn something, but then you still kind of go back to where you were. The dream comparison is really apt, I think, because when if you like, the feeling when you have a nightmare, you've done something wrong in the dream, and you at the time you're convinced that it's real, and then you wake up, you're so relieved that it wasn't real, but you kind of like learn from it, even though this whole situation, the whole thing wasn't a nightmare. You do kind of feel like, okay, I'm glad I went through that, but I'm also kind of glad that I have a chance to like learn from it without the same consequences, maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
Prince Caspian explores this a little bit more. This question of, on one sense, they're kids again, and in another sense, they did have these 15 years of experience, and it's kind of both at this. It's kind of both at the same time. So we will get a little more into that
Oh, I look forward to that.
teaser.
And the beach and the garden.
Yes.
You're finding a little bit more out for next season. This is exciting. One of the things that I've always found interesting is when we get to this chapter, when we would read it as a class in my fourth grade classroom, I'd ask my students here at the end, who are about 9, 10 years old, right around Edmund's age. I would ask them we'd create like a Venn diagram of, not a Venn diagram, but like a comparison chart, like a T chart, and we'd compare the pros and cons of going back from being an adult to being a kid. And it was always really fun to hear, the first thing is always homework again. You now have to go back to doing homework after becoming adult. And I was always the first one every single year. And then, it was cool just to hear what, this perspective, because Phil and I are talking as adults, going back, what that would be like. But it's interesting for kids to think, wait, what would it be like being back to this after I've already been an adult? And so I always heard some really, really interesting things. My students actually seemed a lot more excited, though, to be kids. Like, a lot of
Mm.
times you'd think, oh, maybe, children would be like, oh, I just want to be the adult. But a lot of them are like, no, I want to be the kid. I remember one year I had a kid who was like, well, you don't have to pay taxes yet. So I think that'd be pretty interesting. And another student was like, I don't think they have taxes in Narnia. So, but yeah, it's a really interesting thing, that comes here at the end of the book.
Yeah, and it's something again. The Prince Caspian, like the book addresses it just a little bit. There's just a few sentences, but the movie explores it in more detail. Me personally, it's something again I never gave much thought to until someone brought it up later that they were adults and now they're kids. Um, as far as I think going back to the dream analogy, I was thinking the idea of you come back and you just felt like you woke up from a dream, and that didn't really trying to think why that didn't ring super true to me, that analogy. And it might be
Mhm.
because, again, I bought into yes, they were meant from birth. They were meant to be the kings and queens of Narnia. This is their destiny. This is where they should be. That for me, going back through the wardrobe, I think a better analogy would be like it's waking up. It's more like they're going back to sleep again. Because I feel like Narnia is really, I just felt like they're King Peter, Queen Susan, King Edmund, Queen Lucy. They should be in Narnia. I just completely bought into that.
Yeah.
So I think even going back to being kids, and I don't know, I just bought into they are the kings and queens. I've so completely thought into that. Completely bought into that.
Well, then let's talk about that. Even though we're not quite there yet, is the book? Does it have a sad ending? Then, like, is it a joyful ending knowing that these kids they're no longer kings and queens? They go back to being kids.
Well, Lewis ends on a hopeful note where you get where he says, if the professor was right, it was only the beginning of the adventures of Narnia. So
Sure.
it's I think it is kind of a sad thing that they when they come back, it's oh no. I mean, it's interesting too to go, wow, oh my gosh, so much has passed, and or so many things have happened, and what was from Macready's perspective the blink of an eye. That's really interesting. But I think the fact that there's the sense of, oh, they're in our world, they really belong in Narnia. That's kind of my feeling. But there's the tease and the promise that more adventures to come that I think absolutely keeps it from being a sad ending and turns it into, I've got to read the next book right now.
I think that there's an important part that we see with Edmund that kind of supports your theory of them going back to sleep. I think that Edmund, I think the word that comes to mind is he's like a snot at the beginning of the book. He's just like a terrible person. He's young, but he's just behaving really poorly. And then we get to see him when he's a king, and all the things that he kind of used for evil in a way. Like, he's obviously smart, but he's able to like kind of twist what people said and what they're thinking. He's like, how do you know it's a good fawn, or you can't trust fawns? He's just able to like kind of introduce a little bit of doubt. But now you get to see him as a king, and he's very wise. So he's like using those same abilities, but he's using them for a good purpose. And it seems like all the children kind of become like one of the best or the best version of themselves in Narnia because maybe they are in the right place.
That's a great way of putting it, I think. They become the best versions of themselves. That's a great observation about Edmund. He becomes King Edmund the Just.
Right. Yeah, I love that name.
And we may get a hint of that in a later book on seeing Edmund and how maybe knowing that he himself was a traitor who mended, how that affects the way he interacts with other characters. And we'll leave it at that.
That's good.
Look forward to that too.
We're not getting to like the last battle for like 5 or 6 years. I know that's not what you were talking about, but just the fact that we have years and years to go for some of these books, and Phil has to just kind of sit on his hands and not be able to read forward. I know that's kind of. Thank you,
Wait
Phil,
for the
going
year 2023.
Yeah, and a lot of listeners have shared that they really enjoy hearing Phil's perspective as someone who's not familiar with it. So thanks, Phil, for taking one for the team.
I hope so, because it's really difficult. I'm so close to just plowing through the Prince Caspian book.
Wow. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I finished Wardrobe and I think picked up Caspian. I don't think it was right away, but the very next day.
Yeah, I want to like chain read them, just like keep going.
Yeah. So any thoughts on the stuff with the white stag and the kind of just the whole conversation of forgetting the lamppost, or do we just want to go ahead into them entering back into our world?
Well, what do you guys think about? You brought up the way they speak and sort of the these and thous. Is that I've met some fans who that they find that kind of over the top, and some that love it. Me, I totally understand both sides. I think maybe Lewis might have gone a little too far. He could have pulled it back a little bit as far as just how much their language has changed. But I do like the feeling that, 15 years have gone by, and so there's so many stories. They've had so many experiences that we've missed out on. And the fact that they talk so differently now emphasizes that unseen history. And so even though Lewis might have taken it a few steps too far, I do like what it does for the characters and for the effect of the story.
So I'm going to relate it to Yoda in the way that I think through this. Because nice. I think about how in Empire and in Jedi, I guess we have to say Return of the Jedi now because there's 2 Jedis. And this is a great time for me to plug again that I think that The Last Jedi is a masterpiece. I know that
Well,
not
not everyone's
everyone.
perfect.
Oh, I know. we actually
Ooh,
we have
tension.
some listener feedback. Someone did call in about that. So, but so in Empire and Return of the Jedi, Yoda, he has kind of like his backwards speech that he does, but he doesn't do it like 100% of the time. He talks like that regularly, but he also then has sentences that are structured the way that we would usually structure a sentence with the subject and then the predicate. But then we go to the prequels, and all of a sudden he can't speak a normal sentence. Like every single thing that Yoda says has to be said in a backwards way. And I kind of think of what C.S. Lewis did here a little bit is kind of George Lucas writing Phantom Menace and Clones and Sith, where all of a sudden, like, oh, you just went a little too far. Like, which I wish that was the whole problem with all the prequels, was just that we went just a little too far. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I guess
It's
that's
like
that's a decent comparison. I think that C.S. Lewis on his worst day is a way better writer than George Lucas on his best day.
Sure.
But yeah, a decent comparison though.
Yeah, but I think of
he
it like
needs
that.
to unlearn that which he has learned.
What's
There
that?
you go.
I'm just quoting Yoda.
The white stag. Should we know anything about this? Like, is this? I mean, I think Harry Potter. The second I hear this, I don't know about y'all.
Yeah, I thought Patronus too.
Yeah.
I was biting my tongue and then you said it. It's not fair.
Is there a thing, Brian, that we don't know about white stags? Are we supposed to know that you get wishes if you catch them?
Well, they explain that. I mean, Lewis explains that here in the book, and that's all you. I think again, there's all these. Narnia is a real world, and there's a million other things that have happened that Lewis is. We're just peeking into one story here, and I mean the fact that it wasn't just they were off riding along as kings and queens, and then they found the lamppost. No, they were doing something else. Maybe who knows what kinds of adventures they've been on for the past 15 years, and this was just another one of those adventures. And there's this white stag thing that just strikes me as like history. Again, another story that we don't have time to go into detail about it, but that's what was happening. That was the reason why they got to the lamppost. So I don't think you have to know anything about that. I just think it gives the world that sense of depth.
So it's not like some other mythology we're supposed to know about, like, oh, we should all know that dragons are greedy, or that, vampires don't like sunlight, or something like that. This isn't some other mythology thing that Phil and I just don't know anything about.
I mean, it probably is, to be honest. I think I've researched it before, but for purposes of this story, you just have to all you have to know is, okay, there was a reason they were riding around. It didn't just happen randomly. And again, just makes the world feel bigger and not finite.
Yeah. So then, as they're looking for this lamppost, that's when they enter a thicket. And I'm actually going to read here quite a bit to lead us up.
Daniel.
Yeah.
I'd say it again. You said they were looking for a lamppost, but they were looking for a white stag.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, but that's when they stumbled upon the lamppost.
Yes.
They're looking for the white stag.
Perfect. So as these, king and queens are searching for the white stag and they stumble upon the lamppost, they then enter this thicket. And I'm going to read here the last paragraph or two of the book. I'm not going to read all the professor's conversation, but I do want to kind of lead us to the end of the book, and then we can talk about this. So these kings and queens entered the thicket. Before they had gone a score of paces, they all remembered that the thing they had seen was called a lamppost. And before they had gone 20 more, they noticed that they were making their way not through branches, but through coats. And the next moment, they all came tumbling out of a wardrobe door into the empty room. And they were no longer kings and queens in their hunting array, but just Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, and in their old clothes. It was the same day, in the same hour of the day on which they had all gone into the wardrobe to hide. Mrs. Macready and the visitors were still talking in the passage, but luckily they never came into the empty room, and so the children weren't caught. And that would have been the very end of the story if it hadn't been that they felt they really must explain to the professor why 4 of the coats out of his wardrobe were missing. And the professor, who was a very remarkable man, didn't tell them not to be silly or not to tell lies, but believed their whole story. And he talks a lot. The professor asks these questions about, I'm sure you'll get back to Narnia. And I really want to hear Phil's thoughts on this exchange, because all of a sudden we get this revelation. Not only is the professor wise, like we learned back in chapter 5, with his whole, like, she's either telling the truth, she's a lunatic, or she's lying. But now the professor knows about Narnia. And Phil, I want to know what your takeaway is here.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this. So keep in mind, of course, I have not read the other books recently, and I haven't read all the books, some of them ever. But there's a particular line that the professor has, and it's right after he tells them they won't go to Narnia again by that route. So that itself reveals that he might know a little bit more than we thought before. And then he says, "Nor would the coats be much use by now if you did," which is really interesting because it sounds like he knows that it's no longer winter by that comment.
Well, because
Or
they
that
told
could
him the story, right? They told him the story of how their whole
that's good.
experience. Now Aslan melted the snow and everything.
That's a good point. I'm glad you said
But
that.
I guess I shouldn't try to correct you, though. I guess I should just be quiet right now and hear what you think.
No, that's good. I actually do appreciate that. How can I rephrase this? Okay, so there's a really important part that the professor has. It's right after he says that they won't go into Narnia again by that route. And the line is, he goes, what's that? Yes, of course you'll get back to Narnia again someday. Once a king in Narnia, always a king in Narnia. So there's a couple things there that stood out to me, and I sent a message to Daniel as I was reading this chapter for the first time, and my initial thought was the professor is saying the exact same line as Aslan, which kind of makes me wonder, is the professor Aslan in some way, shape, and form? And I don't necessarily think that, but I do think the professor may have interacted with Aslan because he has the same phrase, which I remember Aslan saying because it's such a weird way to talk for a lion, where he goes, what's that? And he also echoes something about the king and queen, like once a king in Narnia, always a king in Narnia. It just sounds like he knows quite a bit more than we know, or we originally thought before.
Maybe.
Yeah, no comment.
No comment.
I guess we can't really say much about this, but I think this is a great way for new readers. I mean, this is quite a cliffhanger to kind of end on. It's not like the whole story is pivots on this moment or anything of that nature, but it is kind of a little moment at the end. Like, wait a second, how does he know?
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm gonna leave for 5 minutes.
No.
You guys talk among yourselves, and then give our viewers some content. No, one other question for you guys. So after I read this chapter, I went through the Wikipedia article, and I just picked up a few things that I hadn't thought of before. I personally don't agree with this one, but I wanted to hear what your thoughts were. They said that there's a lot of things in common between Mrs. McCready and the White Witch. Do you guys see that at all?
I mean, they're both women.
Yeah,
they're both antagonists in a different form. But no, not really. I think I suspect that kind of comes from a desire. I think there's some Wizard of Oz comparisons going on there. And there's a desire for, it was all a dream, or it was all in their imaginations or something. And I don't think there's any.
And you were there, and you were there, and you were there.
Right? Yeah. I don't think there's any indication here that Narnia is anything but a completely real world existing parallel to our own.
Yeah, I think it's I don't think there's any connection as far as Wizard of Oz comes up. It's very clear that Narnia is real. The only thing I can think of is that Miss McCready is kind of an antagonist for the children here in our world, because that's kind of they're facing World War II, so I was like, that's the kind of only perils they're facing in their lives right now, but they have some pretty serious stuff going on with the London Blitz. But I guess she is kind of the big bad here in the house that keeps them from having fun, and the White Witch is the bad guy in Narnia. But no, I don't really see a big connection between those two.
Mm-hmm.
What their reasoning was, Mrs. McCready kind of runs things. She has similar personality traits, and the kids spend a lot of time avoiding her.
Yeah, I'm just not
I guess.
it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's totally. I don't think there's any significant connection to be drawn there. Or maybe there is.
Yeah.
Maybe in later books. I don't know.
You have to find
Maybe
out,
in
Phil.
book 8, which I've read, but I can't tell you guys because there's no printed copies of it.
Maybe, Phil, maybe we find out later that they are the same person. We're just trying to throw you off of the scent right now. So maybe that's what's really happening.
Yeah. And maybe you're telling me that so that I'll think that's not real.
Okay. All right. Well, let me finish here with just the very last paragraph, and then we can wrap up the chapter. And that is the very end of the adventure of the wardrobe. But if the professor was right, it was only the beginning of the adventures of Narnia. And all I can say is I am so happy that C.S. Lewis did not end here, and that we have 6 more books to go.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
I agree. Yeah, I think it totally, like everything I said before, just copy paste here. That It seems like this ending, they spent such a long time on giving such a complete and thorough ending of here's all. Oh yes, they lived. Yeah, then they went to the beach and they heard the mermaids and they got crowned and they lived for years and years and years and years. And it's such a complete, happy, happy, happy ending. And for that, you would almost think it would end on a oh gosh, finally it's over kind of note. Why didn't it end after the battle? But the way it ends was wait, there's got to be more adventures. They're gonna go back to Narnia eventually, right? That was my reaction at least. I wanted to read. I wanted to start reading Prince Caspian immediately.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
yeah. Well, Phil, you
Wah,
can
wah,
start.
wah.
He can start it. We just can't. He can't go much further. Again, taking one for the team, so we appreciate that. Well, this is the part of the episode where usually I would tell listeners what we can expect in the next chapter, but we don't have a next chapter right now because this is the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But I can tell listeners when they can expect season 2. So we will be back with Prince Caspian in January of 2019 on January 9th. So that is 10 weeks from the day that this episode is releasing. And to kind of tide you over as you wait for season 2, in November, we're going to be talking about the BBC adaptation. And then December, we'll talk about the Disney adaptation. So we'll take 3 weeks between those two and then a 4-week break between the Disney adaptation and the start of season 2. So if you're listening to this in the future, there's really no point to this. But if you're listening to it as it comes out, hopefully you can know when to expect us back. So, Brian, it has been so great having you on the podcast. But before we let you go, we would love to ask you 2 questions that we've asked every guest as they've come on the show. And the first one is, how did you first come into relationship with these books? And then we also got to hear, what is your favorite book in the series?
All right. Well, I first sort of discovered Narnia. I mean, really, I've known about it as long as I can remember. My grandfather taught a college course on Lewis and Tolkien. He actually wrote to C.S. Lewis on a few occasions and got handwritten responses doing his research for his dissertation. And so I've always grown up just being surrounded by Narnia stuff, C.S. Lewis books, and kind of knew about it. But I read it all the way through for myself. I just started reading it one night. Actually, I couldn't sleep one night because I had a cold, and so I just got up and was sitting on my couch in the living room when I was about 12 or 13, and saw literally just on the desk right there were these books, and just couldn't sleep, had nothing else to do, and I looked at them, and the covers looked kind of interesting, so I intended to just read, the first page of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which, thank God, they were listed in publication order. So I see Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, book 1, I was just going to read the first page, and before I knew it, I was halfway through the book, and then, I remember the snow started melting, and then at that point, I finally got tired and had to finish it the next day. But I think it was during an interesting time in my life with some things going on personally. It was it really started making me ask questions about other worlds. And when you go through, there's that Lewis says in his dedication to Lucy Barfield of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe of, someday you'll be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. And I was getting to that point where I was too old for fairy tales, or was just about to get to that point anyway, and found these books that just completely captured my imagination. And since then, I still am kind of a cynical person by nature, to be honest, but these books and the joy they brought me are just a breath of fresh air, and have really caused me to ask questions about why do we feel the need to keep going back to fantasy? Why is it so appealing to imagine that the idea of other worlds, if this really is all that there is? Why is the concept? Why do humans keep on wanting to invent lies about there being other worlds? So it really got me to start kind of asking those questions. Then obviously when I heard they were making movies out of them, your first reaction when you hear they're making a book you love into a movie, the first reaction is cool, and the second reaction is, oh no, I hope they get it right. And I kind of feel this parental, I kind of feel kind of protective of it. Don't just want it to be gobbled up and spit out as the flavor of the week blockbuster. No, this is important. I understand that books are books and movies are movies, and not everything that works in a book is going to work equally well in a movie. I understand that. But make something that is worthy of the title, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Make something that is quality, that is good storytelling, and honors the essential themes of it. And so that's what got me involved with Narniweb, just feeling protective of them and wanting to give, initially wanting to have a voice. And once I got on staff at Narniweb, wanting to give other Narniwebbers a voice as well. Not so filmmakers will take notes, but so that they will just realize, wow, there's a lot of people that really value this beyond just I want my 2 hours of entertainment. That really this book means something special to them. The storytelling better be top notch. We better make a quality film. I mean, for better or worse, people go see these movies, and this might be their only exposure to the works of C.S. Lewis. Like, let's give them a good representation of it and a quality representation. So that's what's kind of motivated me the past decade and a half or so. My favorite Narnia book, the first time I read the series, was The Silver Chair. The second time through, it was The Last Battle. The third time through, and since, it is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Though on occasion, The Horse and His Boy almost sneaks in there. But I love can't spoil too much, I guess, but there's so much exploring other places in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. The plot it's very similar, actually, to my favorite movie, which is 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the plot is razor thin, but it is the exploration along the way that really has always captured my imagination, that I find very exciting. And just what I was talking about asking questions, all the questions about why do humans keep on wanting to invent stories about other worlds if this world really is all that there is? Why is that such an exciting idea? And Dawn Treader and the anticipation of what are we going to find out here, I still find really exciting when I reread it. Even though I know what they're going to find, I've read it a dozen times, I still get caught up in, I wonder what's coming next. So on this particular day, Voyage of the Dawn Treader is my favorite book ever, actually, not just Narnia book.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's my favorite, too, so I can't wait. We'll definitely have to have you back talking about Voyage of the Dawn Treader for sure.
Heck yeah. I'm sure if I reread it, I'm sure I'll have totally new thoughts on it, just like I do every time.
Great. Yeah. Well, Brian, where can listeners find you if they've enjoyed hearing from you? And I'm sure many of them already know who you are, but if they don't, where can they find you at?
Well, there's Talking Beast, the Narnia podcast, which you can just Google that or go to narniaweb.com and click podcast. And at the moment, we have new episodes on the 7th and 17th of every month. Though if there's breaking news like there was recently with the Netflix story, we'll just get one out as soon as we can. Again, the mission is really just to give fans a voice. If these books really matter to you, and you want the filmmakers that are basically the temporary custodians of our baby, if you want them to know that this matters to me and make your voice heard, then that's what we want. And that's kind of the idea behind Narnia Web and the podcast.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, and for listeners, I will link stuff to Brian's podcast and to the website in the episode's description, so you can find more information there. Although I'm sure many of our listeners are already pretty familiar with Talking Beast. Brian, before we let you go, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Just that, like I said before, I think the Chronicles of Narnia has really important stuff in it, and it's been pushed aside. Too many people have read it and said, "Oh, I get it. Aslan's like Jesus," and they think that that's it. And these books deserve a second look. You definitely shouldn't say, "Oh, these are just children's books. They don't deserve my attention." They absolutely do. And maybe the fact that people have kind of underrated them a bit is just a testament to, wow, Lewis it's amazing how much he packs into something that is so simple. Guillermo del Toro said that the most difficult thing to achieve in art is actually simplicity. But that simplicity, I think, has led to Narnia getting it hasn't gotten the second look I think it absolutely deserves. And so I'm just really glad that we've got this podcast and mine and others like the Eagle and Child podcast and the All About Jack podcast and others, just trying to say that Narnia is not, oh yeah, those cute children's stories that came out in the 50s. They're way more than that, and there are still things to be discovered about them even today, and it matters that they get the adaptations right. They're representing something that is much more than just escapism fantasy, that it has things to say that our world desperately needs to hear today.
Oh, man, well said.
Yeah, those are really great thoughts. I just love, one of my favorite things since I found the Talking Beast podcast and some of your YouTube videos is hearing your passion come through for these books. And I'm so thankful that we have so many different outlets and ways for us to talk about this great series and for many of other C.S. Lewis's works as well, too. So, Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you. I'm going to come back.
Yeah. Well, listeners, you can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. And if you have any feedback, you can reach out to us at the narniapodcast@gmail.com. You also can leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. you've also made it all the way through the first season. So, if you stuck with us this far, you might as well just go ahead and give us a good review over on Apple Podcasts so other people can also find the show. Our show's themes were created by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more of his work in the links in the episode's description. Thank y'all so much for being with us for this first season. This has been such a pleasure for Phil and I to do. We've just had so much fun making this and getting to meet new people and having old friends on. Phil, is there anything you want to say before we wrap up the season?
I'm blown away by the support that we've had from Narnia fans, but also people who are making podcasts and other content about the Narnia series, like Brian and David. And it's been fun having guests on too, and just really looking forward to doing this a lot longer.
All right, so we will see y'all next time when we discuss the BBC's adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. All right, listeners. Well, we already missed you so much. We just couldn't leave without one final encore here with some listener feedback, which I'm so excited. We've been letting these pile up for a little too long. And so if you will indulge Phil and I, we're going to read from some of our incredible listeners. You ready, Phil?
I'm ready.
All right. So the first thing we have is a voicemail, and I'm just going to go ahead and play it.
Hi, Daniel from the Lamppost listener. This is your sister, and Rose is an irrelevant character in The Last Jedi. She was not necessary, and we don't need her. Love you. Bye.
Oof.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we've gotten our first bit of hate mail here on the Lamppost listener.
Gonna have to change our number, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, Emily and I can take care of this offline, so I'm not going to make any comments here. I'm just going to let this pass by, and I'll talk to her. I mean, she definitely is not coming back on the show. That's for sure. So we thought we'd have her back for another book, but I mean, she's done. All right. So moving on from our negative feedback, we have a lot of more positive feedback we want to get to. And we are going to start with listener Robert, who wrote us an email. And in this email, one of the things he pointed out was a comment about Peter's sword. And again, going back to the question we asked back in chapter 12 was, why do we think Aslan makes Peter clean his sword? And so Robert had this to say. The cleaning of the sword can easily be seen as cleanliness is next to godliness, especially given the proximity to Aslan. On the war footing, plasma and serum are rather corrosive and adherent, i.e. the famous sticky end. Not only would this corrode and dull an edge, but returning a dirty sword back into its sheath/scabbard could keep it stuck fast, hindering rapid deployment. So, I mean, the list keeps growing of good reasons why Aslan would ask Peter to clean his sword. And I mean, I'm feeling really great about the answers we've gotten. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like we're becoming more and more knowledgeable because of the great community that surrounds us.
Would you say we are now Narnia sophomores?
Yeah, we're so close. I think we're about 2 episodes away from giving ourselves that title.
Yeah, there we go. We had another listener reach out, Phil, a listener named Carrie. And did you want to read that?
I do. Carrie says, "Hey guys, I'm an avid listener and have been since you guys started, and I'm re-listening to the podcast to just hear things I missed. Anywho, when you guys talked about..."
Pause right there for a second? Because the fact that anyone would want to listen to us more than once is amazing. I'm literally blown away by that. So,
I am too.
Carrie, thank you so much for your dedication. That's really, really cool. Sorry, keep going, Phil.
Anywho, when you guys talked about the wardrobe door being open, it may be being just a warning to the children from C.S. Lewis to not lock yourselves in. Haha. I think it could be taken as a metaphor for Christianity. We walk into our wardrobe, our lives, and always are kind of in the dark about where to go or what to expect. But there's always something that one can run into, or you'll have problems. You just have to keep your hands in front of you as a warning. And when you walk into Narnia, it's walking into Christianity, falling in love with the beauty of God and all he has to offer. We leave the wardrobe door open as a caution to be able to run back to our old lives, but we're so curious about God in Narnia as well. But we do have the option to return to our old lives, to be so in tune with God that you don't want to go back, but the concept does frighten you. And there are times when you go back into the wardrobe, but you're always drawn to find Narnia in your everyday life. And then later in another email, she also said, You mentioned in chapter 15 that Aslan galloped across places, and you mentioned the Downs. I'm actually a horse professional, and Downs really refers to the racetrack. Much love, and please keep up the good work. I'm an avid Narnian, and these books are a huge part of my life. Thank you, Gary, for that. And it's great to know what the Downs are, and also that metaphor for Christianity.
What did we say? Because it's been a while since we recorded that episode. What did we think the Downs were? I think I said something like it's like the British countryside. Is that what I said? Do you remember?
That sounds correct.
I think I said it was the
But
countryside. So
I
that's
think
cool
the
to
best
know.
person to ask would be Carrie because she's listened to our episodes multiple times.
Oh, she's listened to more than we have, so that's helpful. Yeah. But thanks again, Carrie, for reaching out. I have another email from Eva. I think I'm saying that right, but if
Eva. That's how I say it.
if I'm not, please forgive me and let us know. Go ahead and reach out to us. And she wrote an email to us about the size of the animals in Narnia. She said this: Mr. and Mrs. Beaver should be larger in size than conventional Earth beavers. Spoiler alert. I'm guessing she means for you, Phil. When we meet Reaper sheep,
Blah, 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 blah.
when we meet Reaper sheep in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he is quite the massive mouse, about 3 feet tall.
Great band.
You're making a Modest Mouse joke. I'm going to say this. It's okay. I think it's okay for you. When Aslan gives the power of speech and rational thought, smaller animals become larger, and some, like the beavers and mice, walk upright and take on more human attributes. They wear clothing and so on. Animals like horses don't change in size. They are pretty big already and have room in their heads for a decently sized brain and don't have clever paws. Other big farm animals like cows and pigs aren't given sentience and so are eligible as food. Now, I can't remember how much of this is directly out. Well, I can't say anymore. I'll just stop there. As food. As Phil, what do you think about that? Is that helping? We've talked a lot about how big these beavers are and stuff. Is that a good answer for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's kind of nice to have a few rules placed on it,
You
or a few like categories placed on it.
do you also feel like it is spoiled too much, or you still feel good about that?
I still feel pretty good. I feel like I'm getting like just a preview or a trailer of what's to come.
Well, like for Dawn Treader, you know that there's a mouse named Reaper Sheep, right? Reaper Sheep. Oh man, we're gonna have
No.
to ask. We just let Brian go, and now we
Call him back.
we'll find out. So yeah,
I
I'll
don't
give him a
care what
call.
time it is there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had a quick question. Is it Reba Cheap or Reba Sheep?
we'll be back with. He's in Prince Caspian, so we'll definitely find out before we get there. Eva also made another comment and another email about the swords, and so I'm going to read what she had to say about that because again, we've gotten so many good things here. She said, "Swords that aren't cared for can rust. Also, a bloodied sword can stick in the scabbard when you try to draw it in a moment of need," which is the same thing that Robert said. But I think Lewis is going deeper with this. The sword is a tool in a man's hand, as a man's soul might be regarded in God's hand. It is the responsibility of the man to seek God to care for his soul, seeking to remove the stain of sin so he is ready to face the next challenge of life as the soldier cleanses his blade in preparation of the next battle. I've been listening to your podcast, just about caught up, really enjoying your work. So thanks again, Eva, for reaching out. That's a really good thought. I really like what you had to say about the sword and kind of the analogy made between our hand and God's kind of caring for us. That's cool.
Yeah, thanks for that.
All right, well, Phil, we have one more email to get to. Do you want to read that one?
Sure. This one is from Amanda. She says, "Hello and well met." Is that a reference to another thing I'm not getting?
It's mostly like it's kind of an older greeting and like an older English greeting. It's kind of like an idiom. Like
okay.
Sometimes you hear "hail, fellow," and "well met," and it's kind of like a very friendly greeting.
That was actually an idea I had. I think we should all talk like the kings and queens of Narnia for an entire episode. Maybe when we watch the BBC version.
I don't think anyone's going to want to listen to us talk like that for that long. I don't know. Do you think anyone's still listening at this point?
Doth thouest agreeth?
I mean, I haven't edited it yet, but I'm assuming we're probably over an hour into the episode right now. So, listeners, thanks. If you've listened this far, you get a gold star.
Yep.
We're
Take 2.
We're obviously a lot looser here on the listener feedback as we are in the regular episodes.
All right. Amanda says, "Hello and well met. I am so grateful that you have started this podcast. Yes, I do realize that you are now 16 episodes in. Narnia has always been a big part of my life, and over the last several years, I have frequently searched for a podcast like yours. I have been listening to the Tolkien Road podcast as they work their way through Tolkien's work in a book club like setting. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, but kept waiting to find a Christian podcast of C.S. Lewis's work and finally found it in yours. So, long story short, I am so excited about what you're doing. Thank you. Further up and further in, Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. I really appreciate it. We're glad that we've kind of provided something that people have been looking for, and I really appreciate you reaching out because it's nice to know that people are listening to that. It's really nice to know that people are listening to this and that they're enjoying it and that they've wanted this for a while.
Yeah, I think, and we specifically picked this email to end with here at the end of the last chapter of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as we kind of move into season 2, because this has been something that we've been really excited about for a long time now, and it's been, again, what's made this so fun. It's been fun talking to Phil and having all of these guests on, and that's been great. But the best part has been seeing the community around Narnia that loves the books and loves C.S. Lewis and just loves having these conversations. And so that's you. Like, thank you for listening and thank you for engaging. Thank you for supporting the other shows like The Eagle and Child and Talking Beast. This has been really, really fun, and this has been one of the highlights of my year doing this. So I really, really enjoyed this, and we couldn't be more excited for what comes next.
Agreed.
Yeah. No other thoughts, Phil?
Pretty much says it all.
All right. Well, listeners, again, just as a reminder, we are back on January 9th, 2019.
The Lamppost listener returns.
Yeah, exactly.
January 9th, 2019.
2019. That's right.
Pay-per-view. We're monetizing.
Nope, it's free. We're not going to monetize this. There will also be one episode in November and one episode in December, and you can look forward to those. So make sure you keep us in your feed so you can see those as they come out. We cannot wait to be back for season 2.